Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 46, released June 1997, discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And we see the original Metal Gear Solid on the cover. I don't know if this is a good looking cover, but at the time the aquarelle sketches excuse me, on the Metal Gear Solid series were quite rare. Starting with Metal Gear Solid 2, you would see a lot of these images. I don't think these are very good looking, but since I haven't seen them very often, it's kind of nice to look at them. And they're a stark contrast with the game, which is very square and futuristic. It's not, these images are very organic. So I guess this is a nice cover for once. Lots to discuss though, so let's continue on. The opening column is about how Sega will be using Microsoft technology for their Saturn II and 3DFX chips being, at the time, the best graphics you can get in the commercial sector. So Edge talks about how the PC is taking over, at least in the graphics department. So, let's see. Yes, so here we just, like I just said, the 3DFX would be working with the later the Dreamcast. I don't think that was really the case, but still, nevertheless, they did work with Microsoft. Let's see. Yes, and again, Intel chips. I think was it Intel? I'm getting things confused. Now, was Microsoft using its technology also in the arcades? The Pentium 2 is about released, and which would be pretty much the same as the original Pentium, except using the what's called MMX technology, which would help for multiple tasks. Okay, what was this again? Oh yeah, so a couple members of Rare, they left to make games for the PlayStation. They were called Eighth Wonder. And they didn't release any games, actually. They almost had a game, some kind of silly game, sounded like a puzzle game, but that was never released. Not to be confused with the people who started Free Radical. That would come later, around 1999. So, yeah, the 64DD going to be released, although not with Zelda anymore. Okay, what's happening in Japan? Well, here's a commercial for a game. Which one? Wargasm? I don't know why they showed this one, but here we have Star Fox 64. We don't see any images of the game, even though the game was beautiful. But we see people getting all excited about it. Bono, apparently interested in Lara Croft. Here's an interesting... At least interested in the games of Tomb Raider for their concerts, U2. Here's an article about, what's his name again? Andrew Braybrook, who made Paradroid. And it talks about his career after he released a couple of games for the microcomputers. And, well, now he's part of the corporate suits, unfortunately. Some good things happening, like ISIS 64, the 3DFX card, and some bad things happening, like all the games having the name Dark in them, like Dark Project, Dark Reign, Dark Earth, Dark Colony, etc. Okay, Japan, what's up there? Yeah, some kind of do-it-yourself drawing thing, also with pornography, I guess. And yeah, a lot of talk about sex in games, so we see some really funny images here. And Sega apparently also in the coin-op business for distributing or selling cards that you can smell. You see the Aroma Club. I didn't think that really took off. Netview, we have Twilight Lands. This game was never released as far as I know. Looks like a 3D MMO. 64DD, did it ever get a modem? Yes, I think it did for some funny... Nintendo TV programs. Okay, what can you get out there besides video games? We have a space station simulator. Music by bands I don't know. Here's the World Book Multimedia. It's looking like a CD encyclopedia. a mobile communicator by Nokia. That looks pretty cool. It has a stylus. Don't know if I can get it sharp. Actually, it's made by Sharp, not by Nokia. Virtual Pets being released before the Tamagotchi in the West, trying to steal that market, although not as interesting. Yeah, a couple of books. Okay, so here we have Delphine, originally known for Flashback and Fade to Black, which were major successes. From then on, they would mostly be working on racing games, motorcycle racing games like Moto Racer, and there would be at least 3 sequels. So here they are talking about the business at the moment, and I thought it'd be really boring. A lot of people talking about all kinds of things, but nothing new. So yeah, they just want to make racing games now, apparently. French developers. Okay, some pre-screen alphas. We see Quake 2 for the first time. We see the Lamborghini game for Nintendo 64 by Titus, another French developer. A really subpar game. What else do we see? This looks like... this is some fighting game. This one looks really nice, called Blade. Well, I don't care much about the pre-screen alphas because most of these games aren't released. There's not really much shown except images. We see Tomb Raider 2, which was looking fantastic. Part 1 had a lot of caves that all kind of didn't have much detail, but here we see Venice, which looks really nice. Okay, Psygnosis releasing lots of games. Unfortunately, not all of them are very good. We see here Rascal, which was a horrible game. It was kind of like Mario 64, but just not that much fun. There was Cyberdeck, a snowboarding game, which was rather lackluster. Now, Colony Wars was a big thing. This was kind of like Elite, and this was done pretty well made. And they also had, what's this game here? Oh yeah, Overboard, which wasn't a big game either. It's like some kind of pirate game where you steer boats. So now it's really busy with all kinds of stuff. Oh, even more images. Here we have, of course, Formula 1 again. Every year they would release one and they would continue to sell well. And there's also Shadow Master. I don't know much about this game. Looks like a first-person shooter of sorts. So, yeah, here we have the games being released. Okay, Gex Enter the Gecko, made by Crystal Dynamics. This was a 3D version of Gex, same attitude, and I would say a little bit above average platformer game, but not really worth your time. Out of the Void. This was what was the? They changed the name. I don't remember, but it's kind of like Asteroids in 3D, but with a lot of extra bells and whistles. So not that really good, but it would have sequels that would expand on the formula of shooting everything that you come across. Air Race by THQ, totally forgettable. Nessa no Hushi, this game doesn't look like, but it's actually like a fighting game. We see here images of a city and pre-rendered graphics of a character, but it was a really bad fighting game, apparently. Don't even think it was released outside Japan because it's still called that on the internet. Nuclear Strike, yet another strike game for the PlayStation 1. Probably more of the same. Okay, down to Melbourne to talk with, what's the name of this company again? Well, they were making Crush, Kill, and Destroy and Alien Earth at the time. Oh yeah, they made The Hobbit for the computer, which was one of the first text adventure games with images, and also Way of the Exploding Fist, which was a huge hit in the 80s before Street Fighter was a thing. And Alien Earth, they talk about it as if it would be a sequel to Shadowrun, the fantastic RPG for the Super Nintendo, but it turned out to be pretty bad. I couldn't find any positive reviews about it. And what other game were they working on? Oh yeah, Crush, Kill, and Destroy. That was already released. I think there's a review in this one. Maybe last time. At this time there were so many real-time strategy games, a lot like Command and Conquer. I don't know which was released. And Crush, Kill, and Destroy was above average, but whatever. Okay, Metal Gear Solid. Looking very blue and green. So I hope you all have played it. The first half of the game is fantastic, especially at the time, because we didn't have that many sneaking games. Very atmospheric. There's a lot of talking going on though, but somehow the story was pretty well done. Now the second half of the game is just too much story, and there's hardly any sneaking going on. It's more like puzzles. You get a lot of boss fights and a lot of backtracking, but the first half of the game would kick ass and make... I mean, you got this demo back in 1998, which everybody had, and it was just so much fun to play the first two parts of the game, which were also the best moments of the game, to be honest. Okay, yeah, Game Boy Emulation being discussed. Master System and Game Gear in one part because they are very alike. The MSX, the Japanese computer, the mid 80s. The NES gets 2 pages, of course. Atari ST. PC Engine gets 2 pages because there was a lot to discover for emulation at the time. The ZX Spectrum, England's favorite console of all time, probably. And it had a lot of fantastic games. Remember, it had a faster processor than the Commodore 64, so those games have actually held up better, even though a lack of color. Here's the VIC-20, the 16 kilobyte Commodore computer, and the games were very limited. Also very limited was the 6-Clair ZX81, which also had, I think, 16K, so in black and white. The Auric 1/Atmos, this is a computer you hardly ever hear anything about, and the Vectrex, the coolest computer ever made with vector graphics. And some talk about how the Mega Drive, SNES, and Amiga emulators are coming along. Talking about them, how they are too hard to emulate at the moment. I mean, they cost too much energy or computing power. Nowadays it's not a problem. So, video game violence. We see 2 sides of the discussion. We have Joseph Lieberman, at the time a Democrat, now a Republican, as far as I know. And he being concerned about the effect of video games. And he made sure that you had the ESRB ratings. And we have Henry Jenkins, one of the first university professors to talk a lot about video games, and he says the effects are either unsure or quite minimal. But this is back in 1997. Doom and Mortal Kombat hadn't been around that long. It's not an issue anymore. So there's some talk about the ratings, and this guy talks about the actual science, and he says there's just no very good science on what the effects are. It's really hard to find out what a game does in the long run. Voodoo Graphics. Okay, on to the reviews. Good, we're hurrying up because there's a lot to talk about in this issue, and maybe I'm going a bit too fast even. Star Fox 64 gets a 9 out of 10. Still the best Star Fox game. You can get it on 3DS too, and yeah, you could also ride as a tank, just like the first one. You can choose your own missions. There's multiplayer mode. Looks fantastic. Everything a Star Fox game should be. So that's highly praised. And yet another fantastic game for the Nintendo 64. If you asked me at this time, the Nintendo 64 actually had probably more really outstanding games than the PlayStation. So there was quite a competition going on between the 3 big consoles. Although by now Saturn was losing. Tobal 2 is quite an improvement on the original Tobal game, especially when it comes to gameplay. The single player mode wasn't improved that much better, but it still felt more like an RPG. So Edge gives it an 8 out of 10. It's seen as a bit of a hidden classic, even though I don't think it's a good RPG nor a good fighting game. Dungeon Keeper, Peter Molyneux's last really great game, I think. I mean, he made Black and White and Fable, which were not as good as we hoped, but this was everything we could hope for. Dungeon Keeper took 3 years to make. It's all in 3D, so you could walk around in it, and it had graphics comparable to Quake 1, which is quite amazing. It's a RTS where you play the bad guy. There's more focus on building, and the bad guys are actually the good guys coming in to try to steal your loot, and you use all kinds of funny demons to stop them. So highly original. Check it out, or at least part 2. Part 2 is pretty much more the same. It just has sharper graphics and a couple more extra units. Gets a 9 out of 10, cementing Peter Molyneux's credits in the video games business. Shining the Holy Ark. So this is a dungeon crawler for the Saturn. Gets a 6 out of 10. Comparable to Wizardry and Dungeon Master. Apparently there's a 3D town you can walk around, but most of the time you're spending the dungeon, slashing away, trying to get your way through the maze. ISS Pro. So the Nintendo 64 version was fantastic. Here we have the PlayStation 1 version. Also gets 9 out of 10. So I'm not sure which one is better according to Edge. But yeah, this is for the next couple of years, Konami would have the best football game on the market easily every year. So this is the first one on the PlayStation 1. Fanduel Hearts, a lot like Final Fantasy Tactics, but released a little bit earlier. Gets an 8 out of 10. Really good graphics, good story too. In my opinion, it's slightly better than Final Fantasy Tactics, although Tactics had much more options. And if you ask me, afterwards you had games like Dissidia that really convoluted the genre. I haven't played it much since then. I would rather stick to the simple Advance Wars-like games. But yeah, a classic on the PlayStation 1. Outlaws. What was it? Made by LucasArts. Yes. So they made a cowboy first-person shooter. So interesting new way of presenting the genre. It had very cartoony graphics. I hope you can see it. It really looked like a Western, which was really cool. But other than that, it was a pretty boring game. So it gets a 5 out of 10. Independence Day, a horrible game for the PlayStation 1. You fly around shooting things, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Much better playing Star Fox. Carmageddon, I guess only a 6 out of 10. I would have expected a little bit higher. Yes, it is simple, but how many racing games at the time gave you the choice of race to the end or defeating all your enemies? It's quite a tactical racing game because there are all kinds of things you can find. The races took really long, so you have plenty of time to also look for things, extra power-ups, people to kill to get extra time. Every race was more like a puzzle. Yeah, the cars, they had interesting physics, I could say that. Part 2 is more of the same. Look just like Dungeon Keeper, looks sharper, a couple extra things. I don't know if any of the later Carmageddon games are good. They made a re-release recently. I don't know if that was good. IQ is a puzzle game where these blocks keep coming to you and you have to figure out the logic to make them disappear. Gets a 7 out of 10. Like Cooler World, it's not very good, but for some reason, a cult classic. Tale of the Sun released for the PlayStation. It gets a 5 out of 10. Not actually sure what this game is about. Apparently you play some cavemen and you try to keep your village happy or something. Okay, little reviews. Epidemic gets a 6 out of 10, a first-person shooter for the PlayStation 1. Need for Speed 2, not as good as Part 1, gets a 5 out of 10. Swagman for the PlayStation also gets a 5 out of 10. It's made by Core, the people who made Tomb Raider. It's a top-down shooting game, I think. or it's more like Zelda. I don't know. Formula Carts gets a 4 out of 10 for the PC. Here, one of the worst games of all time, The Crow, City of Angels, gets a 2 out of 10. It's a horrible beat 'em up, very dark, bad graphics. I mean, look how dark it is. I can't even. It's hard to tell what's going on in the picture. And most of all, really bad camera angles. Raiden Dx, for some reason, Edge looks at all the Raiden games. Raiden. And this time they give a 6 out of 10 for the PlayStation 1 release of DX. And I wish I could get sharp, but here we go. That's better. Done with the reviews? Yes. Okay, so a retro view of Star Fox for the Super Nintendo. Only 4 years old at the time of writing, but still worth looking at again. And yeah, bad frame rate. But other than that, I guess it was okay. I didn't like it that much as a kid, though. Here's Emu, which is an emulator for old school arcade games. Look at that. Okay, so gallery. Which game is this? Wipeout? Spacecraft? You see the Wipeout type font here. Oh, Colony Wars. Yes, that was the good game made by Cynos. So, of course, they would use the same type font again. Metal Gear Solid 3D images. Some other games. What's this? Bizarre Creations. I don't know. Nice lighting, though. Okay, let's go through the... You can't have commercials like this. The company name's Climax, so they're telling you to... Well, yeah. That's sexism in the 90s for video games and their companies. Things will get worse, to be honest. You could chrome your Nintendo 64. That looks cool. Okay, so these are 2 articles on developing games. As you can see, a lot to read. Really dry stuff. This is about a conference. This is about the GDC in California. And there's some talk about how it used to be a small gathering of developers, and now that's a big commercial expo. And it will continue to be so even more and more. I mean, this is 1997. I mean, up until about 2006, so another 10 years, GDC would always be like the expo for the people in the know. I mean, like, of course, you also had to go to E3 because that was the biggest thing, but GDC was where you would see the really interesting things going on, and you can meet the brightest minds in industry. So, what's this again? Oh yeah, so here's some talk about the Yarozi for the PlayStation 1, but also a lot of other development kits for all kinds of other systems. Like the Game Boy, very popular, the program for it, because it uses a Z80 chip, which was a very popular chip in the 80s. The ZX Spectrum also used the Z80, and easy to program for, lots of tools to be found. Okay, a baseball game by, was it Konami? Dynamite Baseball? No, it's Sega. Okay, so they made a baseball game. They also made Virtua Striker 2, so they both look really nice. That's all I could really say about them. Maximum Force, what kind of game is this? Made by Atari. Is it a shooting game? Yeah, it's a shooting game like Virtual Cop. And Marvel vs. Street Fighter. Classic fighting game, of course. Marvel vs. Capcom was much better. And here you see images of that Japanese presenter who was part of the game in the Japanese version of the game. He seems to be holding a doll. Get sharp again. So the letters of the month. A whole page of people complaining about the Nintendo 64 not being 60 Hertz and having black borders. And yes, so talk about importing the console instead. One person complaining about how Edge showed an image of the Brontosaurus and Turok, but it wouldn't be in the final game. So this person's saying, hey, why don't you review the complete game? And Edge says, well, we review what we get from the makers, and usually they're almost done. Sometimes they're not completely done, but usually they are. And yeah, that's what we get. And if we wait for the commercial release, you'll be able to buy the game before we review it, so we won't be doing that. This letter was all over the place. What was it again? I don't know. It was a picture of some guy at the bottom, so I thought it was interesting, but he just touches on, the writer touches on a bunch of subjects that weren't that interesting. And one person saying the piracy is rampant. That was a case in the late 90s for the PlayStation. Okay, Q&A. How do you... Jesus, what were the questions about again? Well, somebody concerned about the M2. Well, spoiler alert, they'll soon be folding. And, yeah, some question about data on 64, whatever. Okay, so next month, CD1, Edge will be giving a computer version of their magazine with the magazine. So you could look at all kinds of videos of what you would find in the magazine. And they'll be going to Acclaim. That's right, Acclaim at the time, quite in a dip. They had a huge success in the mid-90s with NBA Jam, Mortal Kombat. They licensed a lot of games like The Simpsons, and they made a lot of money. But they kind of got stuck in the 16-bit era, and the titles like Batman and Robin, or was it Batman Returns, they didn't sell well. And all of a sudden, Acclaim looked to be in a very bad position. The stock price plummeted. But they released Turok, and their sub-companies like Iguana would be working on other games. So, well, as you probably know, Acclaim would stop existing around 2006, I think. Maybe it's 2007. So it was near the end for the company. And if you look closely, you'll see that the metal frame spells out Edge. I know it's not sharp, is it? Can I get it sharp? Anyhow, it says Edge here, so that's cute. There we have it. Solid Snake again. Looking younger because apparently an older looking Snake would be less commercially viable, they say in the article. And that was that. Hope to see you next time. Edge 46.